The Spanish city of Barcelona saw violent clashes between police and protesters on Tuesday night, calling for the release of rapper Pablo Hasél, imprisoned for insulting the monarchy. Togo announces it will work to certify Russia's COVID-19 vaccine for use in the West African country. And Ecuadorian presidential candidate for the Union for Hope coalition, Arauz, completed a working trip to the U.S. after his victory in the first round of the elections. Hello and welcome to TeleSUR English. I am Estefania Bravo from the headquarters of Quito in Ecuador. This is from the south. Hundreds of protesters took to the streets of the Spanish city of Barcelona on Tuesday night, calling for the release of rapper Pablo Hasél, who was imprisoned earlier in the day for insulting the monarchy. Hasél had been barricaded inside Lleida University in Spain's northeastern Catalonia region since mid-Monday, along with more than 50 supporters. But he was escorted out by riot police early on Tuesday and taken into custody. It marked the rapper's latest efforts to resist imprisonment and draw attention to what he portrays as a campaign for free speech. Violent clashes with police have been reported, with thousands said to have gathered in the city. Spanish party Podemos, which forms part of the ruling coalition, has called on Twitter for a pardon for Pablo Hasél while it works to present its proposed law on freedom of expression. Last Monday, the Spanish government said that it would propose not punishing verbal excess in the arts with prison sentences.
We are going to register in the next few hours a petition for a pardon for Pablo Hasél, because we understand that it cannot be a democratic reality that while the investigation for corruption in the monarchy is closed, those who criticize it in their songs are imprisoned. It cannot be democratic normality that while demonstrations are held with irrelevant permission in which there are exaltations of Nazism, of the Holocaust, there is someone in jail for singing that the Bourbon is a thief. And it seems to us that it is not democratic normality that Spain is the only country in Europe, with the exception of Turkey, that has a rapper in jail, and another in Belgium, who also has the protection of the European Court.
After weeks of debate, France's lower house of parliament voted in favor of the so-called anti-separatism bill brought forward by President Emmanuel Macron's government. The draft legislation, which has been criticized for stigmatizing Muslims and giving the state new powers to limit free speech and religious groups, was backed by a majority by lawmakers in the National Assembly. President Macron's centrist party rallied around the law, with 347 lawmakers voting in favor, 151 against, and 65 abstaining. The bill will now be submitted to the Senate, where Macron's party does not hold a majority. Among the more than 70 separate articles, the law expands the ability of the state to close places of worship and religious schools, as well as to ban extremist preachers.
Unanimous against this law, which was exactly what we feared, the government set the stage, and the right and the far right went to a rampage in terms of discrimination. It's anything but a law on the restoration of republican principles. It does not talk about social equality. It does not talk about school separatism. On the other hand, it is a law that was used for a fortnight to actually point a finger at our compatriots of the Muslim religion.
We have the feeling of having accomplished our duty, of having responded to what was, I'm used to saying, the gray areas between the black areas that are the fight against terrorism and the white areas that are the fight for equal opportunities. Gray areas too are often the breeding ground for terrorism. In any case, the preparation for a form of separatism. Therefore, in all conscience and full serenity, we are going to vote for it.
Moving on, the Indian Army has released video footage showing what it says was the de-escalation of Chinese troops from their shared border at Pantong So, which taught classes last year. The video was released just a few days after China and India decided to pull back frontline troops from disputed portions of their mountain border where they had been in a standoff for months. The troops began the disengagement last week at the southern and northern banks of Pangong Lake in the Ladakh region. The tense standoff began in early May 2020. The tensions later exploded into hand-to-hand combat that left 20 Indian soldiers dead. Since then, both countries have stationed tens of thousands of soldiers along the de facto border called the Line of Actual Control. On Tuesday, an overcrowded bus drove off a bridge and into a canal in central India, killing at least 40 people. Officials said 6 people were rescued after the accident in Madhya Pradesh state. More than 46 people were on board the bus, which was designed for 34. Rescuers recovered 40 bodies and were searching for other passengers. The water supply to the canal was cut to aid the rescue effort. Officials are currently investigating the cause. Police said more than 110,000 people are killed every year in road accidents across India. Peaceful demonstrations against Myanmar's military takeover resumed on Tuesday following violence against protesters a day earlier by security forces and after internet access was blocked for a second straight night. Groups of demonstrators turned out early in Yangon and other cities to demand that the nation's elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi and members of her ousted government be freed from detention. In Yangon, Buddhist monks marched through the streets before holding a demonstration outside the UN's local office. Monks' presence in the ranks of the demonstrations will be used to validate the marches, as in Myanmar, the vast majority are Buddhist and still deeply traditional. The protests are taking place in defiance of an order banning gatherings of 5 or more people.
We come out on the street protesting against the military government to show that we are standing together with our people and to help reduce their suffering.
Let's take a very short break now. Join us again after this. And also, don't forget to follow me on my Twitter account at @TeleSUR for more news updates. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. This Tuesday, Togo's foreign minister said his country will work to certify Russia's COVID-19 vaccine for use in the West African country. Robert Dusi spoke at a joint conference with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, in Moscow. The Togolese foreign minister said Togo would like to buy the Spunitk V vaccine as soon as possible. Russian scientists said the vaccine is safe and effective against COVID-19. In phase 3 trials, it showed a consistent, strong protective effort across all participants' age groups. Over the weekend, Hungary became the first EU member to start using Spunitk V, while Croatia has also expressed an interest in procuring the vaccine.
In general, Russia is capable of many things, and now it gave to the world the Spunitk V vaccine. Russia was always in the forefront of science and technology development. That's why we will now start a necessary procedure to certify the Russian vaccine, and we will hope to buy it as soon as possible to fight the global pandemic. The Russian Federation has a consistent position about the necessity to resolve African problems in an African way, because external interference will never do any good.
The first shipment of Sinopharm's COVID-19 vaccine developed in China left Beijing for Budapest on Tuesday. Hungary is the first group in the European Union to approve the Chinese vaccine. The first shipment, which contains 550,000 doses of the vaccine, developed by the Chinese state-owned company, is enough to treat 275,000 people with 2 doses each. After the arrival, the first shipment will undergo additional testing by the National Public Health Center before the inoculation begins. Hungary earlier broke with the EU's common vaccine procurement program by approving the vaccine on January 29th and has purchased 5 million doses. The Japanese health minister said medical staff on the front line of the country's hospitals will be the first to receive the coronavirus vaccine when vaccinations begin on Wednesday.
Starting tomorrow, the vaccination of medical staff will start. While getting the system properly ready, this time medical institutions go first, and after that, healthcare professionals, elderly people. At that time, while each local government has a solid system in place, it means that people with underlying illnesses and who are engaged in nursing care facilities and such, and then the general public. It is important to properly provide information about side effects. If you don't provide such information, as if there are no side effects, even a slight side effect, people will worry about it. It is important for the public, the understanding that information on side effects that should be provided. I think this is the most important thing.
In the Netherlands, a court ordered the government on Tuesday to end the curfew it imposed last month to curb the spread of the coronavirus. In a written statement, the Hague District Court called the curfew a far-reaching violation of the right to freedom of movement and privacy that also indirectly curtails the rights of freedom of assembly and demonstration. The government extended last week the 9 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. curfew into March, using a law allowing it to bypass the usual legislative process in emergencies. However, the court said the introduction of the curfew did not require the use of the fast-track process as it had been discussed at length during the coronavirus crisis. The country's Justice Ministry said it was studying the ruling.
The curfew measure is based on a law intended for super urgent cases, for example, a dike breach. In cases where the government cannot first consult with Parliament to draft a law, it has even debated with the House of Representatives, so then that no longer relates to super urgency case. The judges have considered that there is a pandemic, that there is a virus that also mutates, placing great pressure on the healthcare system. It is a time of great concern and difficult decisions, but also drastic measures such as the curfew, they must be based on good law.
South Africa has reopened the more than 20 land borders after a 15-day closure. This was the government's strategy to fight the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. South Africa is also a host country to thousands of migrants, but one of the busiest borders with Mozambique got to a very slow start. Not many migrant workers rushed back to South Africa on the first day. Here's Matuba Malachi's report.
The Lebombo border gate with Mozambique opened at 6 a.m. in the morning on Monday, but hours later, even the Home Affairs Minister arrived to an almost empty reception area.
And we have opened at 6, so it's 3 hours. Almost 4. It's almost 4 hours. And within 4 hours, how many people have we seen?
The officials blamed the bad weather for the delayed entry of thousands who were expected. But on the South African side of the border, informal traders say their lives are hanging by the thread. He says people who buy from his food stall are locked behind the border gate. He says border gate officials don't buy his food and relies on people who come from the other side to buy his stock. The Lebombo border between South Africa and Mozambique is not having an influx of people who usually have work here in South Africa, and people are alluding that fact to the expensive COVID-19 certificate that people need to move into South Africa. The only flow we've seen so far is that of the river you see behind me, and these trucks that are moving in and out of South Africa into Mozambique, they've never really been affected by the closure of the borders, but the people who actually make a living from Mozambique into South Africa, we have not seen them coming in their numbers as usual. The Home Affairs Minister says the COVID-19 negative result is not negotiable to enter South Africa.
Unfortunately, this matter was debated very thoroughly even during the first phase in Cabinet. There's no way government can pay for people to visit. Yeah. It happens nowhere in the world. that we pay you money in order to visit us. I mean, it shouldn't. So any person who wants to visit South Africa, unfortunately, will have to produce that certificate.
A little further from the border into South Africa, job losses and a strained economy. This man owns this complex. He says the closure of the borders added to the depression caused by the pandemic.
The closure of the borders has impacted the business drastically because especially this town relies on the community and of Rosana Garcia and a lot of people coming through the border, going to Joburg and so forth. The closure of the border has affected the business drastically. Business, in terms of business, we're down to about 15 to 20% at this point in time. Once the border opens, there's a lot more flow.
South African taxi operators here at the border say they too are affected by the closed borders, and with no migrants in sight, more trouble is looming for them. He says he's been waiting for his first passenger since 4 a.m., but no one has come from the other side of the border. There are plans for the South African economy's recovery, but there's definite uncertainty for those who rely on a thriving economy. From the Lebombo border post in South Africa, I am Matuba Mahlaj.
The representative of the World Health Organization in Guinea gave an update on the preparation of the response to deal with the new Ebola epidemic, which was declared a few days ago in Guinea.
I believe that the vaccine is being procured following approvals at the government level. The WHO headquarters is in charge with the regional office of supplying and forwarding. Experts will certainly be deployed to keep this vaccine in ideal conditions until it reaches the field, and teams of vaccinators who are already trained and who served in the DRC and also in Guinea at the end of the last epidemic are already being remobilized to support the national coordination of the response.
The WHO representative also said there are reasons to be optimistic thanks to lessons learned from previous outbreaks.
The reasons for optimism are the lessons learned and the technological and scientific advances that we have seen between 2016 and now, in particular vaccines, rapid detection tests that are easier to use in the field, therapeutic methods as well, means of protection such as centers that make it possible to treat patients without direct exposure of caregivers or with better protection of families, as well as the lessons learned in community involvement. So by taking up all these achievements, we can be optimistic that we will not have a disaster on the scale of what happened last time.
Let's take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. Ecuador's presidential candidate for the Union for Hope coalition, Andrés Arauz, visited the United States to hold a meeting with Ecuadorian migrants ahead of the second round vote scheduled for April. Arauz, accompanied by Ecuadorians living in the U.S., toured the most iconic areas of Queens in New York City. During a speech considered his first campaign event after the first round of the presidential elections, Arauz thanked those present for their support. He also promised to improve consular services for Ecuadorian citizens in other countries. And in statements to the press, Ecuadorian presidential candidate Andrés Arauz rejected the neoliberal model that President Lenín Moreno imposed on his country and also detailed his proposals to improve the quality of life for Ecuadorians.
We are against the austerity policies that were pursued by the government of Lenín Moreno. We want to implement a heterodox economic policy that will increase public investment, that will increase social protection for the population, and that will in itself create economic recovery in the short and the medium term. So this is what we're proposing, and including an emergency package for 1 million vulnerable families in the Ecuadorian population. Also, incredibly, the pandemic has created a new problem, which is lack of internet access for about half of Ecuador's student population that hasn't been able to continue their studies because of lack of internet. So we also need an emergency internet program, which implies large infrastructure investment to cover the entire Ecuadorian territory with quality internet for Ecuadorians, especially for youngsters.
Ecuador's National Electoral Council canceled a meeting scheduled for Monday in the city of Guayaquil to discuss the recount of votes in the province of Guayas and 16 other localities as requested by presidential candidate Yacu Perez after denouncing alleged fraud to prevent him from reaching the second round. Perez's repeated claims of electoral fraud intensified after Guillermo Lasso narrowly beat him to advance to the runoff vote against Andrés Arauz. The National Electoral Council stated that the meeting was canceled because the body is working on the necessary procedure and supplies required to conduct the recount of votes. And Ecuador's indigenous movement will protest against the suspension of the vote recount agreement between candidates Guillermo Lasso and Yacu Perez. Ecuador's leader Carlos Sucus Añay said that starting on Wednesday, they will march to Quito to defend what they say is democracy. The indigenous leader also criticized Guillermo Lasso's stand for breaking the vote recount agreement he reached with Pachakutik candidate Yacu Perez. In this sense, Carlos stated that several indigenous movements and the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador will continue to rally until the National Electoral Council completes the recount in Guayas province and 16 other regions of Ecuador. Moving on, the Colombian state partially acknowledged its responsibility for the massacre of members of the Patriotic Union Party from 1984 onwards before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. The judges of the court heard the final arguments offered during the various hearings regarding the lawsuit filed by relatives of the victims, which highlights the state's role in the persecution of the leftist party. In the proceedings, the Colombian state recognized its responsibility in the cases of just 219 of the more than 600 victims of human rights abuses. While limited social organizations consider the recognition is an enormous historical significance as it provides the possibility to demonstrate before the International Court the violation of human rights, assassinations, forced disappearances, judicial setups, and among other crimes perpetrated by the Colombian state. On Wednesday, Colombia will start administering the COVID-19 vaccine. The vaccination campaign began 3 days ahead of schedule after the arrival of the batch of the Pfizer vaccine. The company will first start in the cities of Sincelejo and Monteria, with health workers and elderly over 80 being the first to receive the vaccine. President Iván Duque said the campaign will reach other areas in the coming days. Colombia recorded over 3,500 new infections and 181 COVID-19 related deaths in the last 24 hours. In Bolivia, this Tuesday marks the 100th day of the administration of President Luis Arce with positive results in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. After his electoral victory with more than 55% of the vote in 2020, the president launched the national plan to seek the urgent recovery of the economy after experiencing 11 months of the de facto government led by Janine Áñez. During this period, Luis Arce proposed several strategies that also included the fight against COVID-19 and the dismantling of the neoliberal structure that the de facto government tried to implement after the coup d'etat against former President Evo Morales. Experts highlighted expectations regarding the economic situation and the management of the pandemic, which has received criticism from Bolivia's right-wing groups. And lastly, Brazil is experiencing a wave of threats against trans, feminist, and Afro-descendant women candidates elected in the municipal elections of 2020. We have more details on these attacks and their causes in the following report.
The Brazilian elections of October 2020 were the first at the municipal level after the murder of Councilman Marielle Franco. Elected figures representing Afro-descendants, feminists, and LGBT movement won several positions in the elections. However, over a span of 2 weeks, a total of 2 attacks against transgender councillors were registered in Sao Paulo, with gunshots fired at the homes of Carol Yara and Samara Sostenes.
This meant I had to leave my house immediately, go to another place, and not even my mother knows the address. I'm in another practically clandestine address. I am an elected parliamentarian, together with the women of the Socialism and Liberty Party Feminist Caucus, but the 46,000 votes I secured did not save me from being in clandestinity today.
A third incident registered in the recent days was the invasion of the cabinet of the Sao Paulo Council Chamber, where the trans councilwoman Erika Hilton acts. Previously, Duda Salabert, the most voted for councilman in Belo Horizonte and the first trans woman to reach the chamber in that city, was threatened. The same happened to Carol Dartora and Ana Lucia Martins, both councilwomen of the Workers' Party and the first Afro-descendants elected in Curitiba and Joinville, respectively.
It is a state that little by little is becoming more authoritarian, taking away people's rights, social rights, destroying public patrimony on the one hand, and on the other hand also persecuting activists, persecuting the left.
Before the election, Federal Deputy Taliria Petron, a friend and party colleague of Mariel Franco, had denounced repeated plans to assassinate her to the United Nations. All the cases of attacks correspond to feminists, LGTB, and Afro-descendant figures acting in leftist parties, a symptom of today's Brazil.
Brazil has been experiencing an escalation of political violence for a few years now, the main event being the assassination in 2018. In these 2020 elections, even more black people, many more black people, transvestites, transsexuals and women were elected. That made the attacks, that wave of political violence, to escalate. What we're seeing now is a big threat against candidates, those elected, but also on democracy in Brazil.
The municipal chamber of Sao Paulo refused to provide security to councilwomen elected as part of the collective candidacies to share posts, restricting that right to those who headed the candidacies. With their leap into politics in 2021, the figures who have managed to enter the chambers of the Brazilian cities run the risk of being assassinated.
Ignacio Lemus y Julia Nassif para TeleSUR.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And don't forget to follow us on our social media accounts. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram as well. For TeleSUR English, I am Estefania Bravo. See you next time.